all and one present over here for this session, and welcome to the course MMBC 017 Advanced Strategic Management. So, dear students, before proceeding for the entire course, let us have a brief discussion on the course overview, the journey of ours that we are going to have for the next 12 sessions. Right. Now, as we have understood, the concept of management is more confined to the management of resources available for the organizations. But in due course of time, there are many such contingencies which have impacted the organizations, which have put a question mark on the organizations for their survival, etc. May it be in terms of the uncertainties that is imposed on the organization, may it be the volatility on the organizations, may it be any kind of contingencies whichever has been an impact on the organizations. So the forthcoming 12 sessions that we are going to have, that is divided into 4 different blocks, and in block 1 we will understand the concept of corporate management. Now, we have understood the concept of management, but what was the reason that the thrust was given on corporate management? The basic aspect of strategic level of decision making, and in due course of time, the changes that were incorporated leading to the corporate management itself. So what is corporate management? How these corporates as a whole are being taken into consideration? There has to be a holistic approach for the entire management of the organizations. So we'll have a thrust on that corporate level of management. What is this corporate planning is all about? How this planning has been incorporated with the implementation part of it, the action part of this, and how this implementation and actions are to be taken into consideration in line with the proper evaluation, proper monitoring system itself. All of those things that we are going to discuss in block 1, that is introduction to corporate management, where we do have 2 units. One is corporate management and introduction, and the second one is the corporate policy itself. Beyond that, if you do talk of these challenges that these organizations do have, and when we do talk of the basic challenges imposed on the organizations by virtue of its internal environmental factors or maybe the external environmental factors. So organizations do pass through a very tough times where survival is a question mark for the organizations. There has to be an answer to that. Of course, we have discussed it many times in different forums that to overcome these stiff competitions, organizations need to have their competitive advantages. It's okay, but most of the time when we talk of this organization's strategic level of competitive advantages, the organization has to take a call in its maturity phase. Otherwise, the organizations may have a downtrend movement. So most of the organizations nowadays, they are coming out with many such strategic level of decisions like mergers, acquisitions, buybacks, takeovers, small business unit kind of concepts, strategic alliances. They do form alliances with other organizations. Now it has been a mandate for the organizations either to go along with the economic crisis, or you can say the organizations must cope up with the kind of challenges. Otherwise, they don't have a chance to survive. So what sort of strategies that the organizations need to carry out is what that we are going to discuss in our block 2, that is corporate level growth strategies. So it's not only a question of survival for the organizations, but along with that, organizations need to move ahead with new strategies. So all those, no, may it be acquisitions or may it be disinvestments, may it be buybacks or takeovers, may it be integrations or diversifications, whatever growth strategies that organizations need to have, they need to adapt for their survival. Beyond that, we are at the age of globalization, where we take the entire globe as a single marketplace. But question is, when I go beyond my domestic territory to expand my business at the international level, to expand my business now beyond the boundaries of the domestic country, can I have the similar sort of strategies? Can I have the similar sort of policies? Of course not. So we need to understand the basic process of internationalization. There has been a myth. Every people do say that globalization is doing everything in a similar way everywhere. No, that's a myth. We have to understand the process of moving from the domestic level to the global level. Moving from a domestic level of organization to be a global organization, we need to pass through the phases of internationalization, pass through the phases of multinationalization or maybe transnationalization. And after that, we are going to be a global organization. So the journey from being international to transnational to global, right, requires different sort of strategies to be adopted by the organizations. A single strategy may not work properly. So that is what we need to understand. What are the things that we need to take into consideration when we move from domestic level of organization to be a global organization? So this block 3 deals with those kind of strategies, international strategies, where we'll understand this internationalization process as a whole. We'll see how we need to take these challenges, evaluate the market risks, and come out with our own strategies to deal with all those things. All of those things are to be taken into consideration. But all of our efforts for implementing these strategies, or all of our efforts in carrying out the organization's objectives or making the organization's movement towards growth and development, are dependent on many such enablers. I like to tell you that module 4 is one of the important modules of this particular course, where we are talking of the strategic enablers. What helps us in carrying out our business in the line of growth and development. So the role of information technology, or nowadays we do talk of information communication technology, ICTs, IT or ICTs, whatever you do talk of, right, is highly significant. And everything nowadays is data driven. Everything is data driven. So if I'm going to take a decision, I need to have data. I'm going to have a strategy that has to be based on the data. So the role of IT has become significant at the present time. And that is what we need to understand. How this IT enables the formulation of strategies. IT enables strategies. We do talk of that. Beyond that, we are talking of technologies, R&Ds. We say the entire world is moving. The only constant thing in the world is change. Everyone, it's a very common aspect of the management, right? So either we will be a part of this movement, transformation. If not, then we don't have a place. We cannot survive. That you understand. So the kind of impact that the science and technology is having on the organizations, that will define the organization's success towards accomplishment of goals. That is what we need to understand. So how this technology helps the organizations in carrying out many different R&Ds, may it be in the product line, may it be in the service line, may it be in the structures of the organizations, may it be in the policies of the organization. So all those things are to be taken into consideration. We are talking of the basic thrust of managing the knowledge dimensions of the organizations, knowledgeable workforces of the organizations, knowledge system of the organization, right? Or may it be when it comes to having that competitive advantage. We say that it's not that we always try to do the things in a different way, but we need to experiment with that, right? So that is where we need to come out with the requirement of is innovations in the organizations. We are talking of the disruptive thinking process. We are talking of the expansion of the thought process. What is going to ensure that the organization moves in its path of achieving the goals. So these are the four such blocks that we are going to have in the forthcoming 12 sections, like starting from unit 1 to unit 12, we'll cover up. But for today, let us focus on the first such thing, understanding the concept of corporate management. So let us focus on unit 1, module 1, unit 1. We are talking of the corporate management itself. Now, what is the reason why do we think of this corporate management itself? As we discussed, that the present day demands an holistic approach. The present day demands an holistic approach. The entire organization has to be taken together. But when we do go to the definition of management, or when we do see the growth and development of this management itself, right? We come across with basic concept of managing resources only. We to talk of these resources which may have constraints, and we need to manage them. But gradually, it was felt that these resources can also bring contingencies. So there has to be a proper planning for these resources, and that is where we do come out with this corporate planning process. Planning can be done at different levels itself, but corporate level, at strategic level, we are going to discuss all of those things in our forthcoming sessions, right? And what we need to understand is corporate planning has become one of the fundamental pillars of this corporate management itself. Beyond that, planning alone will not be sufficient. What is required is a proper implementation of the plans, proper implementation of the plans itself. Most of the time, we do make a plan, but when it comes to the implementation part of it, we do face a lot of problem. So we need to understand what are the things that we need to take into consideration while implementing it. And the third aspect that we need to understand is that even if I do make an implementation, but I cannot assure myself that whatever I have planned, whatever I have implemented, through that I'm going to land in the zone of my organizational objective or my mission. Maybe, may not be. So what is required is proper monitoring system, the evaluation and control system itself. So whenever we do talk of this corporate management stands on three pillars. One is corporate planning, the second one is the implementation of these corporate plans, and the evaluation and control of these corporate plans itself. And that is what I was telling you, that the journey that we had. Now, when we talk of this adolescence, now there was a time when we had this approach. It's a very reactive approach, you can say, right? And it is for a short-term period only. Managers in the organizations, they focus more on situational challenges, and any kind of situational challenges, you know, is short term, so maybe for a temporary period of time. So the thrust was on resolving the issues which emerge at the place of work, which emerge at the place of work itself, right? And issues, cannot be taken as a generic, strategy, or whatever the strategy I do have to deal with those kind of issues cannot be dealt as a generic thing. So of late, it was realized when, we have these unforeseen contingencies, right? Maybe the recent example you can think of this COVID kind of impact, right? Or maybe the recessions, economic recessions, maybe the Great Depressions that we had in our past days, right? That led the organization to think that a consistent plan is required to deal with those kind of contingencies. And that is where we had given a thrust on this planned policies itself. So it has to be a long-term approach. It has to be a very, taking a wider canvas, taking all those kind of contingencies into account itself. Right? So a requirement of a proper plan, a requirement of a proper policy emerged from that due to these contingencies and the kind of impact that the organizational factors had because of these contingencies. Again, of late, it was realized that only this planning will not going to give any kind of benefit unless and until you do have you to take the constraints being imposed by the environmental factors. May it be the internal environment, may it be the external environment. We are talking of. Whenever we talk of this internal environment, may it be the stakeholders of the organizations, may it be the kind of resources of the organization, may it be the technological environment of the organization, may it be the kind of employees' loyalty towards the organization. All of those factors leading with the internal stakeholders are to be taken into consideration. So whenever I do make a plan, I have to take all of those things together. But beyond that, somehow I believe these internal factors, I do have a control. Okay. But what is more challenging for me is to see that external environmental factors are being dealt properly. May it be the political scenario, may it be the economical scenario or technological scenario, social aspect of the organization. All those kind of things are to be dealt in a proper way. So when I do make a plan, I do make a plan not only by considering the internal environmental factors, I have to take the external factors also. Go with the flow. Whatever that external factors do demand, even if it is not possible to take all those kind of impact on the organization, but somehow we have to go by the challenges being imposed on the organizations. So that is the reason why from a planned policy, we need to incorporate the environmental strategy interface itself. What kind of impact that this environment does have on the organizations, that has to be taken into consideration. But that will not be sufficient. What is required is with the kind of challenges, because nowadays we do talk of this VUCA world, right? May it be the volatility, may it be the uncertainties, right? Or complexities or ambiguities being imposed on the organizations, right? We cannot rely on a single plan. In such a sense, we can say that only plan A is not going to work for me. So what is required is I need to have strategic alternatives. I need to have plan B, C, D with me. I don't know. Like if my plan A fails, I should be ready with the plan B. If plan B doesn't work, I should be ready with plan C. So time demands that the organizations do come out with strategic alternatives. So organizations must have choices of different course of action plans. That is what that is the thrust of corporate planning. So people to come out with with certain statements like strategic planning, environmental planning, internal planning, corporate planning, all are synonymous, maybe, but there are differences. We are going to find it out, right? So only having this plan or strategic alternatives through this corporate planning process is not going to help. What is required is a holistic approach. Means these plans are to be implemented and the implementation has to be evaluated so that we do understand that these organizations do move in the right direction of achieving its corporate goals. That is where we come out with the essence of this corporate management itself. Corporate management deals with all these holistic approach. As I said, it is based on three important pillars. One is planning, corporate planning itself. Second one is implementation and the action plans. Third one is evaluation of the things, right? Whether we are moving in the right track or not. So here we do come out with the basic understanding. We'll go to the definition itself, right? But with the basic understanding of this corporate management itself, what is required for the proper implementation of these corporate plans or the evaluation, that has to be understood properly. So the basic aspects is that the implementation of this corporate management requires the active involvement of the top level managerial people in the organization itself. Delegation has to be there, but involvement of the top level management. We do talk of the basic aspects of the governance of the organization. We do talk of the aspects of leadership in the organization. May it be governance or leadership. But most of the time, if you to see, the role of the top level management is highly significant because they are the decision makers. They are the policy makers of the organization. Even if it is decentralized, made with the bottom up approach or made with the team approach, but the role of top management is significant. So the top management people must be proactive in implementing these corporate plans. So the role is proactive. we didn't talk of. But we need to understand the basic code of conduct. Who is going to do what? As simple as that. Code of conduct will give me the answer to that. So it's not about the employees of the organization. This code of conduct has to be implemented from bottom to top everywhere. Every person in the organization must understand their role in implementing the corporate plans. So it's not about the duties and responsibilities only, it's about the accountability. If I have been a part of this, then I must be accountable for my job. So that is what is important for us. So defining each and every employee's responsibility in the entire process of implementing these corporate goals. That is what we need to do. We need to understand the domestic and global market itself. As we discussed, globalization is not doing the similar things everywhere, because there are many such factors which separates the economies of the world. There are many such factors which makes the employees coming into a diversified group. Diversification we to talk of, right? Maybe their cultures, maybe their fooding habits, dressing habits, clothing habits, aesthetic practices, whatever you do talk of, right? So, I'm successful in my parent nation, say in India, doesn't mean that I will be successful in UK or USA or in Saudi Arabia. Unless and until I come out with a basic change in my strategy. I come out with a basic change in my planning process, implementation process. Right? So that is the reason why we come out with a term like local. Thinking globally, acting locally. You see. The reason is every time you need to take a different approach altogether for implementing the things. So a uniform strategy is not going to help you out. That is what it has been mentioned in the fourth point, as you can see. That nowadays we are going through a dynamic phase. Dynamic. The organizations are characterized as dynamic organizations, not a static organization. No, there was a time when you used to have a policy and the policy used to be valid for 10 years, 20 years, something like that. But nowadays, I don't think that any of the policy will stand valid for more than 2 to 3 years time. The reason is organizations are affected by the external environmental forces. So the kind of impact that the external environmental forces would have on the organizations, and unless and until the organizations will adapt to that, unless and until the organizations will cope to that, so perhaps it will be a very difficult aspect for the organizations to survive. So organizations must make themselves dynamic. That is what is the demand. Right? It cannot be static. No? Organizations need to be flexible. Organizations need to be adaptable to all those kind of challenges. Right? So, organizations must move from their orthodox level of practices to the most challenging dynamic practices. That is what is required. We are talking of understanding this market structures itself and the kind of network that these organizations do have. We are talking of mergers, buybacks, all those things are based on the concept of having a network. I cannot be successful, but if I join hands with others, no, as a whole we can be successful. That is what is being taken into consideration. So how it can be implemented, right? We had a talk of these strategic enablers, right? Like, the information technology, information communication technology, made with the R&D kind of thing, made with the knowledge management, made with the innovation management, whatever it may be. So all of those are going to have an impact on the strategic planning process, corporate management itself we are talking about. But at least we cannot ignore the ethics, the value systems, the social audits, because this is what that characterizes the organization. This is what that characterizes the employees of the organization, right? So whatever I do, I have to be ethical in my practices. Whatever I do, I cannot sacrifice with the values, organizational values itself. So that is what I need to understand. That is, ethics values are, or the social audit itself, of course, because we say that organizations nowadays are the integral parts of the environment, society. They do have a responsibility towards the society, right? So societal audit is also important for the organization. So with the kind of support from the top management, considering all of those factors into, or considering all of those factors, we need to implement this corporate management itself. So let us understand what this corporate management is all about. Yeah. Peter Drucker says it has to be a continuous process, because the first such pillar, as we discussed, is corporate planning. Planning cannot be done for a longer period of time, considering the dynamism of the environment. So it has to be a continuous process, a regular process. All this planning has to be done on a regular interval of time, right? And second aspect what it is that we carry out all of these planning process because that will help us to have a systematic decision making process, systematic decision making, uniform decision making process, right? So that is what we to come out with these policies of the organization, policies, right? So first is planning, second one is the policy of the organization, right? Because unless and until we do have these policies of the organization, maybe I'll come out with many such different sort of implementation guidelines. And but we do have limited choices, no? So how can I have different sort of implementation processes for different kind of things? So policies have to be there. Yes, but whatever plans you do have or whatever policies you do have, you must have those plans and policies to be considered in a future or upcoming, you know, contingencies itself. So all of these planning and policies should be futuristic in nature. So it has got two dimensions of its own, right? One is here you're talking of like a short-term goal of the organization. Like, for example, taking or meeting the production budget of the organization. It's okay. You can think of that, right? But accomplishing these short-term goals can ensure that I'm going to achieve the similar kind of thing in my future days also. May not be. So always these plans and policies should have two dimensions. There has to be a short-term dimension, there has to be a long-term dimension. When my short-term dimensions should focus on my operational things, my long-term dimensions should focus on the holistic growth of the organization, like accomplishing its visionary state of existence, maybe accomplishing its mission of the organization, all of those things that will be there, right? So, corporate planning is all about, having that futuristic approach with the kind of, organizing the resources which are going to be deployed for this accomplishment of goals of the organization itself, right? And whenever we talk of these decisions of the organizations, what is important is, as I said, do I have a system of evaluating the results of the kind of plans that I do have? Whatever policies, plans, whatever I do have, when I implement that, that must end up with some kind of result. So is the result is apparent as it is defined? Is the result is in line with the overall aspects of the organization? That has to be there. So whenever we want to talk of this corporate planning process itself, we can say that it has to be evaluated, measured in a systematic way. Right? So, say for example, if I do say I do have a plan, a production schedule, I meet the production schedule, well and good. But if I don't meet the production schedule, then what will happen? Perhaps I need to think of the reasons of non-conformity. What is the reason for which the organization was not able to reach to the goals? That is what that we need to understand. Right? So there has to be a systematic feedback system may flow from the implementers to the top level executives. That is what we need to understand. Right? So a continuous process of making entrepreneurial decisions, right? And with best possible knowledge of their futurity, organizing systematically the efforts needed to carry out these decisions and measuring the results against expectations through organized systematic feedback is what we call it as this corporate planning is all about. So if I do take this corporate planning into consideration itself, right? We say there has to be a futuristic approach. So we are going to evaluate, or we are going to see the impact of the present decision in some future time. So it's futuristic approach. It integrates this strategic planning with this short range operational plans, or it integrates this strategic planning with long range plans of the organization. So whenever I do think of these plans, corporate planning itself, I may have in the back of my mind the vision of the organization, the mission of the organization, right? All of those things are to be taken into consideration. But at the same time, I cannot ignore my focus from the day-to-day operational plans, production scheduling, marketing budgets, or maybe dealing with the human resource problems, whatever it may be. So day-to-day aspects are to be taken into consideration. At the same time, long-term aspects are also to be taken into consideration. Right? As I was telling, corporate planning, strategic planning, long-range planning. Sometimes when we do come out with this kind of things, most of the time people who take this as synonymous to one another, like quite similar to one another itself. But actually, there are differences. Bit of differences are there. That is what we need to understand, right? So the basic aspect of this corporate planning process is to develop that strategic intent and the action plans. So if I do break my vision into missions, mission to goals to objectives to targets, like whatever it may. So my strategic intent has to be clearly defined, number one. And number two is that the action plans for that are to be clearly split. And if I do that, then definitely I'm going to achieve the organization's goals. And at the end, we can think of that rational allocation of resources. And one thing that bothers the organization is that most of the organizations, they don't have abundant resources. Resource constraint is always there, right? So how do you deal with those kind of resource constraint itself? That is what we need to take into consideration. Okay. So rational allocation of resources, advantage that I'm talking about, right? One, then is it that this corporate planning will help in in the holistic growth of the organization. The development would be reflected in terms of each and every vertical. The development would be seen in each and every say aspects of the organization. So there has to be a holistic approach, right? So it's not about confining to few such different things only. There has to be a broader perspective. There has to be a broader look to this corporate, you know, goals, or you can say the corporate objectives itself. Right? This will help these organizations to have this to deal with this kind of dynamic environment itself. Whenever we to talk of this dynamic environment, of course, the challenge is huge, right? Every day we do come out with a new kind of technology. How do I cope? Starting from a very manual way of production to robotics, right? It has gone through different phases. But is it possible for each and every organization to implement all those kind of changing technologies? But organizations need to, if they want to survive, they need to. That is what we need to understand, that organizations must respond to those kind of challenges being imposed on the organizations. Right? That is what we need to understand. Right? There has to be systematic and critical review of the business itself. So maybe we can think of some external consultants, right, who will do this job, or we can think of our own resources to evaluate or review this business process itself. That's what we need to understand. Okay? And moreover, the corporate planning is a process which is more futuristic in our approach, right? So, corporate planning is visionary is okay, but sometimes corporate planning leads to a habit of forward thinking. A habit of forward thinking. What is going to have in future? What are the contingencies that may be there in future? How I'm going to deal with that? All of those kind of answers that you'll have in corporate planning process. Right? Now, coming back to the Indian scenario itself, my friends, actually the implementation of corporate planning in India or Indian organizations was not found to be successful. So I won't say that it has failed, but it has not gained that importance. It has not gained that impact on the organizations. But is there a fault of in the system itself, or is there a fault with the people? What is wrong in that? That's what you need to understand. That in India, particularly, this corporate planning system is a very you can say It's um, difficult kind of thing, complex kind of thing, right? It's not that easy for implementation. Not that easy for implementation, right? So the layers through which this has to be taken into consideration, there's a problem with that layer. There's a problem with that structure. Still, people or organizations with bureaucratic structure or a tall structure do exist, where we do think of many such structural modifications that can be there in the organizations. That's what we need. And we say that, you know, top management of the organization must be actively involved. So, but actually, out of a survey, it was found out that people are, people, they are not aware of this term corporate planning process. That planning is a piecemeal process, right? That planning as a reactive process. But why don't we have a holistic, proactive plan? A plan that can cater to all the needs of the organization during the contingencies. So, if the attitude towards the plan or the planning process will not change, perhaps Indian organizations won't succeed in that. Right? The planning process is doing everything by itself. So, no, if I do take, okay, it has to be a holistic approach, so let me do all the plans by myself. No, it won't work, right? So I have to take the help of the, experts who can really guide me, right? Chief executive's role is a question accommodating with the changing condition, all of those things that we have already discussed, right? But again, as I said, in India particularly, it has been observed that all those people who do make a plan, they do focus only on the short-term goals of the organization. They do focus on this immediate outcome of the goal, like the plan itself. No one is bothered to take the plan for the next 5 years or 10 years. That's what we need to see. Conflict between available database, as we were talking of, enablers of this strategic management process itself. IT, everything is data driven now. So if I do talk of this process, right? If I'm not supported with the appropriate data itself, then there has to be, or the entire planning process could be. So authenticated data, accurate data will help the organizations to overcome those kind of challenges. Okay? Focusing on these current problems itself. So basically, I will say that Indian organizations, they are not aware, they are not involved in the process of implementing these corporate plans. Okay? That is why it is not successful in India. Hmm? But whenever I do talk of this, you know, uh, corporate plans itself, so let us now understand how these corporate plans are executed, right? Now, it passes through these six such phases. The first phase is project implementation. Whenever we are talking of these plans, okay, I don't have the liberty to, take these plans by myself. There are many such statutory bodies, regulatory bodies, which are there to regulate the activities of these corporate plans itself. right? So whenever we are implementing the project implementation phase, here we need to go by the various rules and regulations being imposed by the trade, the commerce, the industry departments of the government of India, or maybe whenever we talk of appropriate government itself, right? So without having that approval from those statutory bodies, I cannot go for any kind of strategic plan. That may lead me to deal with many such problems in future itself, right? So that has to be there. Not only these strategic plans are to be taken into consideration, but we are talking of this procedural implementation, second phase itself, right? So project implementation, where I need to take the approvals from all those authorities itself, statutory bodies itself. But whenever I do talk of this procedural implementation, here I'm talking of the aspects of the organization that is internal to the organization. But still, the impact is there. Say, for example, if I do talk of this directive principles of state policy. So, directive principles of the state policy guides the enactment of various sort kind of labor legislations. So, for implementation of my plan, I need to have labor forces, but the labor forces need to be managed, right, through certain enactments. So, like we do talk of in terms of compensation, we do talk of the Minimum Wages Act, the Payment of Wages Act 1965, or maybe the Payment of Bonus Act, Gratuity Act, ESI Act, right? Or maybe when it comes to regulative legislations, we do come out with the Factories Act, the Trade Union Act itself. All of those things are to be taken into consideration. Similarly, we are talking of the organization's role in terms of its environment and its impact. No? So, what the environmental protection plans the government does have, based on that only your plans can be fine, right? So that has to be taken into consideration. You're talking of resource allocation, it's okay, right? So there has to be proper budget for that. There has to be, budgets can be classified under this four heads, no? Right? We're talking of this strategic level of budget, zero budget, we're talking of PLC budget, or maybe the BCG budget itself. So how do I allocate my resources to the organization? But out of this, some or other, these behavioral implementations are most important things. We say that deals with the kind of leadership that the organization does have. Leadership means whenever we do talk of the role of a leader in an organization, right? So there you can see that the leaders maybe may come out with their autocratic implementation or the behavioral thing kind of thing, right? So the role of the leader is highly significant in the entire process. Beyond that, we say it's about the culture of the organization, maybe the power play, the values of the organization. All of those things will be a part of this behavioral implementation, right? And we do talk of the functional implementation. Functional implementation deals with the productivity, the processes, the people, the place itself, all of them. So, starting from the implementation at the project level itself, right, at this embryonic phase itself, we need to move down to behavioral and functional level of implementation so that the organization can have its own, like, or it will move in the direction of the goal. It will move in the direction of that visionary state. That is how we do come out with this implementation itself. But some or other, we need to think of this implementation at two different levels itself. Now, reviewing evaluations of those plans, implementing plans itself, that can be done in two ways. There has to be a strategic level of evaluation. There has to be a operational level of evaluation. Of course, this strategic level of evaluation is a recent concept, and we do not have much of the contents for that. It has not been researched properly, right? But as we understand, evaluation has to be done in a traditional way. Like first, you're talking of setting the standards for the evaluation, setting up of the standards, right? Second one, you're going for the measurement of what you have planned and what you have accomplished, right? Third, you do come out with the variances, right? Whether it is in a positive train or in a negative train, whatever it may be. The variances says us the reasons for conformity or non-conformity, why a particular goal has been achieved or not achieved. That is what it says us, right? And then we are talking of the correlations. So may it be in a cyclic order, but it has to be done in a sequence way, right? So that is why we said that this evaluation is one of the most important aspects. And as I told you at the beginning itself, that the entire concept of corporate management is based on corporate planning. Then how I need to implement that particular plan for the action plans, right? And I need to review that, evaluate that, so that I can ensure that, okay, my plans are intact. I'm going in the right direction of achieving my goal. That is what we need to understand. Okay? And the towards the end, last, we are talking of like the basic approaches that this corporate management we need to have. Maybe as we understand that top-down approach is there, right? In top-down approach, the role of the top managers are highly significant, right? And here we need to understand that how these top managerial people in the organization will take take up the charge of implementing all those corporate plans itself. Right? Sometimes, because we live in a very dynamic environment, because we live in a very constrained environment, right? Sometimes getting a feedback from the bottom is also essential for any kind of modification in the existing plan. So bottom up approach can also be there, right? Where we take the feedback from the bottom itself. Okay, after careful consideration of all those feedback, then we may come out with certain modifications in the existing plans itself. Sometimes top level managers do prefer to work with mid level executives or bottom level executives, so there has to be a hybrid plan for that. And of course, the best way by which we can actually come out with these corporate plans, implement these plans is by or is through a team approach. Right? So that is how we need to understand that these approaches of the organizations will help us in implementing the corporate plans in a proper way altogether, right? So today we have come to the end of the session itself, and as I said that after having these insights into the corporate management, tomorrow we will discuss more about this corporate policies itself, right? So let us end this session over here. Thank you very much and have a nice day. Once again, we'll join tomorrow at the same time to continue with the unit 2 of block 1. Thank you.